Look, I'm a Marine. I'm not taking a knife to a gunfight. Or a prayer. So what am I supposed to do? I can't run. I can't fight. Well, that's right. Awa will provide. Yeah? So where was Awa? Where was Awa when our son...
Jake! I'm in this place where I have nothing.
If you start listening to the music as music, I've actually not done my job right. My music should be there to give you an emotional connection to what's going on the screen. And I hope that I am manipulating your heart rate with the way that I use rhythm. I'm hoping that I am making you feel something more deeply because of the themes that I've used.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen in partnership with 20th Century Studios, featuring artisans who helped to create Avatar, Fire and Ash, from the Oscar-winning filmmaker James Cameron. I'm your host, THR contributing editor Stacey Wilson-Hunt. My guest today is composer Simon Franglen. Hello, Simon. Welcome to you and congratulations.
Well, thank you very much, Stacey. It's very, very nice to be here.
Very nice to have you. And I saw the film, of course, and it's stunning. And I have to say, I've been humming the music the last few days.
Excellent. Well, that's the job, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, you did your job. And before we talk about your stunning work on Avatar, Fire and Ash, I'd love to learn more about your journey as a composer. And I wanted to know, what was the first instrument that you studied and played?
This thing behind me, a piano. But the real thing is that my skill came, and where I probably came from was, I don't think when I used computers, and I could make computers sing. And that sounds strange, but when I first came to Los Angeles, I was a session musician. And I found a niche, which was I was the guy that could do creative things with synthesizers and electronica and computers and music. And that became my niche because it's just natural. It's just like playing the piano for me, creating things. So that the journey starts with me at 13 writing to the BBC saying, how do I become a record producer? I'm completely useless at everything else, so this is the only thing I could ever do. And I had started as doing records in Britain, and then somebody saw me working in Britain, said, you should come to LA and do this. And I came out and I started doing I started doing records with a guy called David Foster, who was a record producer.
Of course.
So we had a pretty incredible run of records where I would work with him, and it was him and me. He would play on a piano, then I would do the drums and the bass. We would sort of separate out things like the strings, and it was all of the things like The Bodyguard and Celine Dion and Whitney Houston and Toni Braxton and so on. And I was doing those sorts of records in LA. Then Quincy Jones called, then Michael Jackson. And there was the thing that happened because people would hire me to do whole projects rather than just as a session player where you just do a few hours. And at some point in this patch, John Barry called, who was a legendary film composer who won 5 Oscars.
I was just going to ask you about your work with John. Yeah. Yeah.
So John was coming to the end of Dances with Wolves, and I worked with him on the soundtrack. I was a tadpole at this stage, but I was working with John. And John, if you're British, the Bond films and the Ipcress File and Out of Africa and all of these things are an essential part of our DNA. And John and I would have a great time. And I then worked with him on Chaplin and some of the other movies that he did. And we became very, very close friends. From that then came Alan Silvestri, who's another fabulous composer. And I worked for Alan for several years. And then Howard Shore hired me because I could make grungy, unusual sounds as well. So I did Seven, for instance, with Howard and the Cronenberg Crash. And then at some point around 1997, this guy called James Horner phoned and said, come and work on this film, the disaster film that was going to bring down Paramount and Fox. if you remember, which was Titanic.
Yes, I do remember Titanic. Yes.
Yeah, and so I worked on Titanic. I was doing all the synthesizer programming along with a guy called Ian Underwood, and we had no money, had absolutely no money. So because of that, we had to fake most of the orchestra in the score. So because of that, that fakery became part of the sound of Titanic. And somewhere in the middle of it, James said, "You've worked with Celine." I said, "Yeah, I've done tons of records for Celine." He said, "I've got this piano sketch. Did you think this would work for her?" So I said, "Yes, absolutely." So I demoed up the song, which was at this stage was exactly as it was. He'd written a song with Will Jennings called "My Heart Will Go On." So we demoed it up. James flew to New York with my tracks, and I brought back the vocal. I made an assembly of the vocal and mixed it, and then obviously the ship sank, and we were all very happy. And so I then sort of like, for a while then I was doing stuff. I went back to England. I stopped doing films for a while. I was, I think, a bit burnt out, and I had to, so I went to England. My son had been born, and we wanted to educate him over there. And I came back here when James Horner phoned and said, "I've got this other movie, which has these, come and I see 5 minutes of what was Avatar." And I looked at it, and it was an astonishing thing. And so I spent the whole of 2009 working on Avatar 1. And my job was the stuff that was not orchestral. So I was all the gamelan, all the sort of glowing forest, all of the rhythm stuff was my area. We sort of reignited this friendship that we'd had during Titanic. And we just continued working together. And I became like the score producer for his scores there up until, and we were continuing work. I remember originally that I had 2013 booked for Avatar 2. So it was only 9 years late.
I'm going to just put a pin in this for one moment because I do want to go back to something.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Dances with Wolves for a moment because it is one of my favorite scores. And I want to know, what did you learn working with John about world building from that film? Because I think what Kevin did as a director was quite stunning. And the immersiveness of that score and the period piece, I think it was just such a landmark moment cinematically, but also for music and film. So tell me what you learned from John that you have carried with you.
I can tell you there was one phrase I remember talking to him about the buffalo hunt. And I said, "How come you've got all of the violins, all the violas, and all the cellos all playing the same note? Why are they all playing the same tune?" And then there was the low brass, and he said, and I said, "But why are you doing that with all this?" Because I was sort of thinking you'd have to do something more complex. He said, "Yeah, but you can't fight 1,000 buffalo." And he was absolutely right. And one thing I carried with me is sometimes you will hear a simplicity when things are complicated on screen. And his use of theme, his use of resonance is something that I think I hopefully bring with me. The idea that themes are there to emotionally connect is something that James Horner and John both have in common. James is a huge fan of John's work. And I think the idea that a theme, the repetition is something that also that Jim Cameron loves in music, but it's like, you could say that the Terminator, the bum, 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 bum.
Right. I was just thinking about that. The minute you said that, I heard the Terminator theme.
Yeah. Music is really important to Jim. And it can be as visceral as the Terminator thing. And it's something that, for instance, I think that I took with the sound for the Ash in this film, which was to give him that visceral thrill that you could have something that was a motif that you could immediately associate with something. And so I think that taking that from what John did on Dance with Wolves was that you had a sense of the vista. You had a sense of the scale of the infiniteness of the prairies and so on. And because there is, the John Dunbar is this lone character who's out there, and there's a loneliness there. And, and I think that when I look at where I went with, for instance, the Wind Traders, when we see them, I've got the big epic. It's one of those things you go, oh, there's this 800-foot tall galleon, and I could channel all of those big epics into something that is there is this exquisite imagery with this huge vista. And I could go back to those great 30s and 40s swashbuckling scores of the big thematic idea. That because I'm a thematic composer, I believe that tunes are important. I know there are other composers who do textural things, or that's not really my bag. My bag is really very much the idea that I believe you use themes and rhythms and stuff like that to give people an emotional connection to what they're doing, to be the heartbeat of the film. And that, I think, is something that I've carried from my tutors.
That's amazing. And I can absolutely see that in your work. And I want to go back to the first Avatar. And for those who don't know, of course, James Horner passed away, and so sad, about 10 years ago. That's a huge loss. And I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sure you were very close.
Yes.
And you spent 11 months, I think, with him on the first film, scoring the first film, helping him score. And you achieved a really wonderful blend of what I would call traditional orchestral music with the unique Na'vi vocals.
Yeah.
Tell me how you approach that process without overdoing one of them, because it is really the seamless blending of the two that I find so fascinating.
The voice is an incredibly important part of an Avatar score. And if you look at, for instance, this one, the sound has evolved, and I had to evolve it with the films as we went through. So Avatar 1, we have the Omaticaya tribe, who are a forest tribe, and the vocal sound is quite clipped, it's quite crisp, it's sort of almost, there's a semi-African texture to it. But when it came to 2, we've now moved over to the sea tribes. And that is the Metkaina, who are the Reef Clan, and they required a different vocal texture. And so I went and looked at some of the things I've worked with. I found Pacific Island singers. There's that sort of long tone that is used to sing across the ocean. And so so that vocal texture became much more that texture of something that was slightly softer, something more of that so call and response rather than the sort of rather more attacky vocals. And then for 3, where we are now, for instance, there is a vocal texture for the Ash, and it is extremely aggressive, and it is extremely has a real bite to it, and it's and so on. And those are things that are active choices of mine. The Wind Traders have a different vocal texture. Everybody in an Avatar, when I'm writing vocal music, they sing in Na'vi. So it's that thing that you want the language. Part of the sound is the language, and the language is K's and X's and T's, and it gives a particular texture that is somewhat different to the way that, say, a standard choir is used. Although I do use choir, but I also use a lot of solo voices. You may hear quite a lot of things because there is a natural connection between a voice and the listener. We are so tuned to the human voice. And it's something you have to be very careful about in films. And a lot of people don't want to approach it because it's an extremely strong color. Because you have to be careful. If you put your lead actors and actresses singing, and they are, for instance, talking, and there's dialogue you want to listen to, the moment you put a voice that's singing words in the background, your ear starts going to that, whether you like it or not. It can be a
distraction to the dialogue.
And so you have to be very, very careful about how you use these colors. And it doesn't matter if it's a choir or it's a solo voice. The same thing happens. We are attuned to listening to our species. And it's something that we have to make sure that when I'm using vocals, and I am absolutely certain that there is more vocal recording in this film than probably any other film this year, maybe any other film this century, because there's a heck of a lot more vocals in A3 than there is in 2 or in 1. And that's also a nature of what Jim asked of me. And I have to choose those points where if I've got a soloist singing, I will change the type of soloist for different things to reflect things. And for instance, on A1, there is a vocal soloist who I know very well because it was my 7-year-old son, Luca, at the time, who now accompanied me to the premiere and has actually sang.
How old is he now?
He's 22 or 23.
Oh my goodness.
And he sung in all 3 films. But the first time, James Horner asked him, he was a choir chorister, and he asked him to sing on A1. Jim then used that vocal again in A2, plus Luca did some other work. And in 3, we brought him in to do some of the Wind Traders vocals and some of the other vocals in there with some of the other team, including John Landau's son, Jody, as well as part of the vocal texture. I'm very comfortable with using voices as part of my score, but it requires a director like Jim who's very comfortable with the way that they fit within his world.
So I'm curious, Jim is so invested, obviously, in every aspect of this process and has passion for every aspect of it, as we know. What are the challenges of having a director who is so engaged in the music piece of this? Because I have to imagine sometimes there could be a gift in the director not being so engaged. But tell me what the gifts are and what the challenges are of having someone like Jim who's so attuned and actually quite musical himself.
So this is, I think, the perfect relationship for a composer, in that I have two people to please. I have to please myself first, and then I have to please Jim. And there is nobody else. I don't have any producers who have opinions. I have no film company who has an opinion. It is just Jim. And Jim has an incredibly good sense of what music should be within a Jim Cameron film. And that, I've noticed there have been times when that's good and that's bad, in that you get a very, very visceral response, which is what you want. And yes, I have had times when I've had to rewrite things again and again because it's not quite right. But also when I give him something and he goes, that, like I played him the Ash 2 years ago, and he went, yes, that's the sound of the Ash. Then it becomes something that he sort of like assimilates and can actually then inwardly digest it in terms of how he feels about the film. Because the point is, the music is the one bit of the film that he can't control. He can do almost everything else, but he can't write a film score. And so I have to be that interpreter to give him what he needs in terms of delivering the music that is his. I write the music, but the music is Jim's. And Jim also will often, I will write something and he will go, this is great, this is perfect. And 6 weeks later, he will show to me, come and have a look at this. And he will have taken something from 2 hours earlier and put it there. And you go, oh yeah, that's absolutely right. And he has an astonishing sense of the drama that music can give to a film. He believes in sound, he believes in dialogue, he believes in music as being 50% of the film. And a lot of people think of music as just being a glorified sound effect. Jim thinks of music as being an emotional thing to take you on the journey with the film.
It's absolutely a character in this movie. It felt that way to me. I felt very engaged in it, and it's very emotional. And in terms of the relationship that the audience has to Avatar, I was so fascinated to learn that you worked on the Way of Water ride at Disney Orlando. Is this true? You worked on the score?
I did all the music for the Pandora, the World of Avatar, yes. 5 hours of music in there, yes.
That is very cool. And the late, of course, we lost another member of the Avatar family, John Lando, who passed last year.
Yes.
He had said that he knew that you were the person to fill in for James Horner when he saw your work in Orlando. And it made me wonder, how did that experience change the way that you perceive an audience's experience in relation to music? I think about like when I was on the Star Wars ride as a kid, and you think about Space Mountain and all the effects that go into the physical experience of a theme park. I left Avatar Fire and Ash the other night feeling as if I had been at a theme park. That's how it felt. So I was wondering, what did you learn in that more tangible experience that you applied to Fire and Ash?
That's a very, very good question. And I can answer it in a couple of things. One is that the flavors that you bring to things really give you a sense of place. And when I did Pandora, as I said, there's 5 hours of music in the area. And in the two attractions, I don't know if you've ridden Flight of Passage.
I haven't yet. I hope to.
Okay. I've done it hundreds of times and I'm still giggling every time I come off it. It's astonishing because you really are there. And John cared desperately about this, about the park was really important to John. And but one of the things is you wanted to have that sense of immersion, about that sense of being in the place. And music there gave you a sense of place. You didn't want to be in Orlando. You are on Pandora. And so one of the things we did, for instance, is we had just snippets of people singing that might appear in the background on the, like they would be randomly playing 5 or 10 minutes. You would hear some people singing over here, and then maybe there'll be some singing over here. There are tiny little things like that in the film. Now, this sounds stupid, but there is Took and another girl doing a "How many fish go in the sea?" Right? Had to write that. And it's so that's actually a piece of, I designed it, then gave it to the choreographer for them to do that as part of the thing. Those sort of little bits of, I know the technical word is always sounds like a mouthful, diegetic, things that are of the place really, really help. It's a bit like the instruments I designed for the Wind Traders. The fact that I designed instruments and we then 3D printed them for the actors to play, and then they are of the place because I've designed them with the production team, and then we've gone to the prop master and he's 3D printed them, and they exist, and there are 6-foot long string instruments that are Pandoran, that are for the Wind Traders. That's part of what I think I learned from doing Florida, was the idea that if you're going to show a society, then you have to show everything about a society. And we had a thing on Avatar, which we call Culture Club. And Culture Club was me, and it was Deb Scott, the costume designer. It was Dylan Cole, who was in charge of the Navi side of production design. And it was Brad Elliott, who was the prop master. And we had 2 researchers. And we would build cultural catalogs for the various clans that we came across. So like when the Metcaina came, there had to be something about how we would deal with that. When we have the Ash, there's something to do with how the Ash will be treated, or the Wind Traders. And that's something I think I can take very much from the work in the park.
I love that. Who knew that Orlando would play such a large role in your life, right?
Yeah, I know. Absolutely.
And if you have one hope for what an audience member may experience in terms of your score for Avatar, Fire and Ash, what is something that you would want people to experience when they sit in the theater, they put on the 3D glasses, and in terms of the relationship that they have to your music, what do you hope that they experience?
I've made a couple of choices here, which are, should we say, radical-ish. One was to bring the mix more out into the cinema, to make it more immersive. Because I wanted the feeling, I never want to get away from the dialogue, and you have to be able to follow the story. You have to, if you start listening to the music as music, I've actually not done my job right. My music should be there to give you an emotional connection to what's going on the screen. And I hope that I am manipulating your heart rate with the way that I use rhythm. I'm hoping that I am making you feel something more deeply because of the themes that I've used. I hope that, for instance, when Jake and Neytiri at the beginning and they are somewhat separated, I used different versions of themes, but they were separated, 2 lines that were moving apart so that it felt like there was that separation. I hope that you understand that I make you smile and I make you cry, because there is, for instance, one bit towards the end when something bad happens, but it makes everybody cheer. And I am very proud of the music that happens there. I think I'm very proud of the music in one particular bit in the middle, without giving away too many spoilers, of Varong's journey. There's a point when Varong's arc changes, and she is in her hut and she is talking. The cue starts from really strange, weird orchestral things and ends up going to a sort of solo flute for Varong, where she tells the story of the Ash. And then it evolves and it changes, and then there is one drum beat that happens. And if I was to say that the film pivots on that drum beat, it's almost like there is one thing, and when that drum beat changes, you know you ain't in Kansas anymore.
It's a great scene, and definitely no spoilers, but her character is definitely my favorite addition to this new chapter.
Oh, yeah. Una's great.
Very
Absolutely.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for joining me today. I wish you so much congratulations and luck as you share this movie with the world.
Of course.
I'd like to thank Simon for joining me on this special episode of the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen. Tune in for more conversations with other artisans from Avatar, Fire, and Ash. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. Thank you so much for listening.